One of the questions I get asked all the time as a reading coach is how can I best manage my reading stations? If that is you, you're going to want to check out this video because today I'm going to walk you through my best top 4 tips on how you can best manage your reading or literacy stations. So before we dive into these 4, and believe me, you're going to want to hear all 4 of them. Make sure you stop and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything new from the Cia Harris Teaching channel. So I have saved my very best tips just for this video. So you are going to want to make it all the way to number 4 so you don't miss out on all of the good nuggets that I've got to share with you today. All right. So literacy stations, there's a lot going on. Classroom management, you've got content, you're trying to run a station or work with students. You're trying to make sure the environment is workable and productive. So there's a lot going on. So how can we ensure that it all works like a well-oiled machine? Well, I've got 4 tips that I think are really going to help take your literacy from good to amazing. So here we go. Let's jump right into number 1. And number 1's a big one. Take yourself out of a station. You, the teacher, should not be a station, ever. What that does is that puts you inside a very strict box. You are on a schedule, and as you are working with students, you don't want to necessarily be on a schedule. By taking yourself out of the rotation and leaving your students rotating through just regular centers and you not being a station yourself, you're opening yourself up to a lot more flexibility. And if you think about your students, they really should be allowed to be more movable when it comes to working with you. Yes, you're going to have high students. Yes, you're going to have low students, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those students are going to be high and low every single week based on the content that you're teaching. So you may see that you have a high student who really struggles with this one standard. They should be pulled and moved to a different group that week. And then vice versa. You may have a low student who is just really excelling at this one particular standard. Therefore, they shouldn't be in the low group for that week. So there's a lot to say of the reasons why behind moving yourself out, but the biggest is flexibility. You can pull students as needed based on your qualitative and quantitative data. So you're able to go in, pull, 2 students. Maybe you want to pull 5 students. Maybe you only want to pull 1. Another great thing about it is maybe you want to meet with this group for only 5 minutes, but your station is like 12 or 20. Maybe you want to meet with them for 25 minutes because you're really honing in on a very deep critical thinking skill that takes a lot more time and effort. So there's a lot of different reasons why, but I guarantee you this is going to be a game changer. Nothing really changes on the student's end. They still rotate. You can still have your calendar or your rotation schedule. They can still go to station 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can still use your timer. All of that stays the same. The only thing that changes is they don't come to you as a station. And then you're able to pull groups a lot more flexibly and really work and hone in on what exactly your kids need at that moment. If you need to do a one-on-one assessment, you have time. If you need to do a goal-setting conference, you have time. You have now taken yourself out of that box, given yourself the gift of freedom to really be able to work with your kids how you need to work with them. So that is tip number 1. I told you they were good. Are you ready to go on? Tip number 2. Everything that you are working on in a station, so this is the kids, not you as the station, but your students, everything that they are working on needs to be taught and reviewed before going into the center. So this is what I mean by that. We are not going to buy brand new, gorgeous games from Lakeshore Learning and then throw them into a center and hope that our kids figure it out. And then we're also not going to stand in front of the whole class trying to explain to them last minute before we dismiss them into the centers and explain to them how the game works. If you want your stations to run smoothly and successfully, then you need to make sure you are taking ample time to actually review and teach exactly what those expectations are for that center. So this one kind of connects to number 4, and I'll get to that in a second. But what this is helping you do is to ensure that when your students are working independently, whether they're on their own, whether they're doing something with a partner or doing something with that whole group at their station, that there's no question left unturned. They are going to know exactly how to play that game, exactly how to do that activity. So if it's a graphic organizer you're asking them to fill out, it should be a graphic organizer they have filled out with you before. If it is a game that you're asking them to play, then it should be a game that you have played with them before. If you need to, then make sure that's something you do at your small group for a few rounds to make sure, all of your students get exposure playing the game with you. And that way they know exactly what to do. Then it can go into a center. Maybe you need to do it whole group. Maybe you go over that graphic organizer or that game and you play it whole group as partners. And then you put it in a center. This is really going to help ensure that your students have the ability to troubleshoot, to look for hiccups. You're able to monitor, is this game even appropriate for my students? Are they really practicing, or are they spending too much time on the nitty-gritty of the game itself? You want to make sure that you have a system of like checks and balances in place to really make sure your students' time is best suited when they're in their centers. So everything that they do in those stations needs to be taught and reviewed before it's put into their station. All right, here we go. Tip number 3. We only have 2 more left. Number 3, grade nothing. Yes, you heard me. Grade nothing. Your environment during centers isn't the best as far as really getting out of your students the right kind of concentration and effort that you want them to be exuding during an assessment. What they do in those stations should just be for your data collection. You can still collect it. You can count it as completion grades, all of that, but it should not count as an actual grade. There are too many distractions. They may not have been able to ask a question if they needed to, because you're busy and you have your crown on, which means, they're not supposed to disturb you, right? Or whatever kind of signal you have. It could be it's extra noisy during center time. So that goes back to the distractions. Is just not the right type of atmosphere to be saying, well, I'm really going to take a grade on that. Really, you should just be collecting it and using it to see where and what your students need more help with. Okay. So promise me, raise your right hand and say, I promise, Sierra, I am not going to grade anything that I get from my centers. I promise you it's going to be okay. If you need more grades, you'll find other ways to do it, but center activities really should not be used for a grade. All right, and tip number 4 today, this one's my favorite. So must do, may do activities. Here is how you really get your kids motivated and focused to get their work done when they are completing reading centers or stations. I loved using this must do, may do system. Basically what it is you look at how much time you have in your given station. Let's say you're doing stations and they're rotating on a 20-minute basis. Well, that's a lot of time. That's okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to ensure that the activity that you are having them do in that station should only take anywhere from 50 to 75% of that allotted time. So for 20 minutes, it should take no more than 10 to 15 minutes to complete, even for your slowest learners. That then entices them to ensure that they get that activity done. And then in that station, there are now may do activities. The may do activities are fantastic. And this is where I always use all of those fun lakeshore games and things from things that you could buy online and, all the fun actual tangible games. So those would all be my may do, and they had an activity that they had to get done and turn in first. That was their must do. So for example, I always had a response to text center. So we would have a text, they would have to read it, there would be a question, they would respond to it in their journal. Their journals then got turned in, and they had the rest of the time to play a game. Now, the games, I had the milk crates, and there were all kinds of options. So you can give them lots of different options for their may-dos, but their must-do is one activity for everyone. So as they rotate through their centers, they come to a new station, They can get their must-do activity done. And again, 50 to 75% amount of the time, like they should be able to get it done pretty quickly and easily. They turn it in, and the remainder of the time, they can use whatever may-do activities that are there. It could be a may-do activity, could be silent reading. A may-do activity could be a lakeshore game. It could be a color coding dice game that you found on TPT. It could be anything, but have some options. That way, one, you're able to encourage them to get their work done because they want to play the fun stuff, right? Two, you're focusing on ensuring that they're getting their stuff done in a small amount of time, and that keeps your centers less crazy, not all the bells and whistles, like really honing in on what you want them to do in that station and what you want them to practice. And then they're a lot more motivated to get their work done because they want to do the fun stuff. So may do, must do, great system to have in place. And I would absolutely recommend trying that. All right, so there's my big 4 tips for literacy centers. So drop me a comment and let me know which one of these 4 are you going to try? Maybe which one have you already tried? And if you were to add a 5th tip, what would it be? I would love to hear your tips. That way teachers can see them and read them below and get even more great nuggets of information to help their literacy stations really become manageable and successful. So hope you enjoyed these 4 tips. Thanks so much. Again, make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you over in the next video. Bye, everyone.